The twin suns hung low over the frontier world of Kareth, their light spilling in pale gold across the bustling marketplace, where humans and Kaleri moved, with the awkward rhythm of two peoples forced to share the same soil. Traders shouted their prices, children darted through alleys, and guards stood watch at every corner to ensure the fragile peace did not break. In the midst of this noise, the sudden flare of voices drew sharp attention. Harinya, daughter of a noble Kaleri house, stood encircled by rivals from the Dathar clan, their eyes burning with triumph as they hurled accusations of dishonor. Her chin was raised with practiced pride, yet her voice trembled as she tried to deny their charges, the crowd pressing closer to see a spectacle many had long been waiting for. The Dathar did not come for words alone. One of them unsheathed a curved blade that gleamed in the fading light, and with that motion, the marketplace shifted from noisy bustle to tense silence. The Kaleri valued their traditions fiercely, and, in their culture, such a public challenge was more than insult. It was a sentence. Arinya's hands shook as she drew the ceremonial sword at her side, a weapon carried by her family for generations, more symbol than steel, its weight heavy, with history. But fear clouded her movements, and as her rival lunged forward, she faltered, stumbling back. The sword slipped from her grip, clattering to the stone floor. Among the crowd, a human stood watching, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in the dark uniform of the Terran Peace Corps. Marcus Hale had been stationed here for months, always keeping his distance from Kaleri disputes, knowing well that human interference was rarely welcomed. Yet as he saw the young noblewoman cornered, her eyes wide with helpless panic, something inside him refused to stand idle. Before thought could catch up with instinct, his body was already moving. He pushed through the line of onlookers, ignoring the gasps of both human settlers and Kaleri citizens. The rival warrior brought his blade down in a swift, merciless arc meant to finish the matter quickly. Arinya cried out, her hands raised though she held no weapon. Marcus had no weapon either. No time to draw or call for aid. Only the desperate choice before him. His hand closed around the hilt of the fallen sword, its grip unfamiliar and heavier than any blade he had carried before. He swung up just in time, steel meeting steel with a ring that echoed across the market square. The strike jolted through, his arm the impact biting, but he held firm. Sparks leapt from the blades and the rival stumbled back, eyes wide with disbelief. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut the air. No one spoke, no one dared to move. To the Kaleri, the sight was unthinkable. A human had taken up a Kaleri noble's sword, not as a thief, not as a servant, but in defense, in combat, in open defiance of a challenge meant for another. Arinya's mouth fell open, her breath caught in her throat, the world spinning with the weight of what had just happened. Her rival stepped back, his face twisted with shock that swiftly burned into rage. "You dare," he hissed, his voice trembling. "You dare touch a blade not your own human?" The accusation cut through the quiet like another blade. The crowd shifted, whispers rippling, some in outrage, some in awe. The ceremonial sword was more than metal. It was lineage, duty, and bond. To wield it was to accept responsibility that went far beyond the act itself. Marcus held the weapon steady, his jaw tight, eyes locked on the Kaleri warrior before him. He did not know the law, nor the tradition, but he could feel the weight of every gaze upon him, the tension like a storm about to break. His voice came low and steady, carrying further than he meant in the hush of the crowd. "She was about to be killed. I won't stand by and watch." His words were simple, his tone unshaken, but they rang strangely in Kaleri ears. To them, he had not merely acted in defense. He had taken a step into their most sacred customs without permission, without understanding, and yet with a conviction they could not easily dismiss. Arinya pressed a hand to her chest, her heartbeat racing, as she tried to make sense of it. She wanted to tell him to drop the blade, to step away, to undo what had already been done. But the Kaleri were bound by eyes, by witnesses, by laws older than her lifetime. He had wielded her sword in combat, and there was no undoing that act. The Rival warrior's hand trembled as he raised his blade again, fury clouding his judgment. Then face me, outsider, and answer for your arrogance. The crowd murmured louder, Kaliri elders exchanging sharp looks, human officers stepping closer but unwilling to interfere. Marcus adjusted his grip, the sword awkward but manageable, in his trained hands. He had fought battles before, though never like this, never bound by rituals he could not yet see. But his resolve did not waver. He had stepped forward not for honor, not for glory, but because he could not watch someone be struck down in cold blood. That truth alone steadied him. The rival struck again, this time with greater force, and the clash rang through the square. Marcus braced, the shock biting into his arm, but he held. He pivoted, using his weight to push back, surprising the warrior with strength drawn not from style but from raw determination. The Kaliri gasped as they saw their trained duelist stagger against a human who had no knowledge of their forms, only instinct and will. Each clash of steel drew the crowd deeper into silence, the tension thick as smoke. When Marcus forced the rival back a final step and leveled the ceremonial sword before him, the marketplace held its breath. The Kaliri warrior did not advance. His pride burned, yet he could not deny the force that held him at bay. Marcus lowered, the blade slightly, his chest heaving, sweat beading at his brow. His voice came rough yet resolute. This ends here. No one else will be harmed. The rival's eyes narrowed, but he did not strike again. The silence was broken by a single sharp voice, an elder Kaliri who had watched every heartbeat of the duel. The bond has been invoked, the elder declared, and gasps rippled through the crowd. Arinya staggered back, her hand tightening. At her side, her mind reeling. Bond? The word struck her like a blade itself. She turned her gaze to Marcus, who still held her family's sword, unaware of the depth of what he had just done. The humans nearby looked confused, uncertain. But the Kaliri understood too well. The human had not only defended her life, he had crossed into something far more binding, far more dangerous. And as the marketplace erupted into hushed, urgent voices, Marcus realized that in trying to prevent bloodshed, he might have set something in motion that none of them could stop. Under the fading light of Kareth's twin suns, the marketplace buzzed not with trade but with disbelief. Every eye locked on the man who had dared to lift the sword of a Kaliri noble. Marcus Hale stood motionless, the weapon heavy in his grip, his chest still rising and falling from the force of the duel. He did not fully understand what he had done, but the crowd's whispers told him it was no small act. The word, bond, echoed again and again in hushed tones, and though he did not know its meaning, the look on Arinya's face told him that his life had just become tangled in something far beyond his grasp. Arinya's dark eyes were wide, her breathing shallow, her hand trembling as if she wanted to reach for the sword but dared not. To the Kaliri, their family blade was not only steel but blood, a symbol of their heritage. For another to wield it in combat meant an oath had been spoken without words, and once invoked, such a bond could not be undone. Marcus had only meant to save her, but in the eyes of the Kaliri he had stepped into her clan's deepest tradition, binding himself to her future in ways he could not yet imagine. The rival from the Dathar clan glared at him, his pride burning hotter than his fury. He could not strike again, not after the elder's declaration. If he did, it would no longer be a duel but a violation of their customs, and such a shame could not be borne. So he spat on the ground, his voice sharp and bitter. Keep your human. He has sealed his fate more surely than I ever could. With that he turned and stormed away, his companions following with stiff shoulders and tight jaws. The marketplace slowly exhaled, but the whispers did not stop. Humans murmured in confusion, Kaliri in shock, and somewhere between the two stood Marcus and Arinya, caught in a silence that weighed heavier than any sword. Arinya finally found her voice, though it was quiet, strained, almost pleading. You should not have touched it, she said, her words barely carrying above the murmurs. Marcus frowned, lowering the blade though he did not yet release it. What was I supposed to do? Let him cut you down in the middle of the street? His tone was not harsh, only firm. the tone of a soldier used to answering duty with action. But Arinya shook her head, her eyes full of something like fear. You don't understand. By wielding my sword, you have declared yourself part of my blood. In the eyes of all who saw, you are now bound to me and to my clan. Marcus blinked, her words settling like stones in his mind. Bound to a people who barely tolerated humanity's presence, to a noble clan that likely wanted nothing to do with him. He wanted to protest, to argue that he had meant no such thing, but the weight of the crowd's stares silenced him. Every Kaliri present already believed it, and belief was stronger than intent. The elder who had spoken before now stepped forward, his robes marking him as a voice of authority. He looked at Marcus with a calm but unyielding gaze, the kind, reserved for one who knew his word carried centuries of law. Human, he said evenly, you have taken the blade of Kaliri blood in open combat. By the law of our ancestors, that act binds you to the bearer of its lineage. You cannot walk away from this. You are tied now to her fate, as she is to yours. The crowd stirred again, some voices rising in protest, others in dark amusement, and a few in uneasy approval. Marcus's fellow human officers shifted uncomfortably at the edges of the gathering, their hands near their weapons but their orders clear. Do not escalate unless violence erupts. They could do nothing but watch as Marcus stood rooted in the center of Kaliri tradition, alone and outnumbered. Arinya lowered her gaze, her voice breaking slightly. You've brought shame upon me, but also, you've saved me. The law will not forgive either. She stepped forward, her fingers brushing the hilt as if to take it back. But Marcus released the sword gently into her hands before she could ask. For a moment their eyes met, and though neither spoke, both understood that their fates had been tangled far too tightly to separate. The elder raised his voice once more, declaring for all to hear. The bond will be judged. Until then, the human remains under the protection of Clan Kaler. No hand may strike him, no voice may condemn him, without trial. With that, the marketplace began to disperse, Kaliri muttering to themselves, humans exchanging wary glances. The danger of bloodshed had passed, but a new danger had begun, one that could not be undone by blades. Arinya turned sharply, her long robe sweeping the ground as she motioned for Marcus to follow. He hesitated, then fell into step behind her, knowing that whatever this bond meant, he had no choice now but to see it through. They walked in silence through the narrow streets toward the Kaliri enclave, the distant sounds of the market fading behind them. Marcus's mind turned in circles, each thought heavier than the last. He had acted on instinct, nothing more, but instinct had pulled him into a world of ancient laws and rigid honor that he barely understood. He wondered what punishment awaited him, what obligations this bond would demand. Arinya kept her head high, but he could see the stiffness in her shoulders, the weight she carried now doubled by his presence. Finally, as the enclave's tall gates came into view, she spoke, her voice low but steady. You must understand this, human. By our law, you are no longer just an outsider. You have tied yourself to me. In time, the clan will demand that bond be fulfilled fully, and that path will not be easy for either of us. Marcus studied her profile, the sharp lines of Kaliri nobility etched in her face, the quiet strength in her tone. He did not know her, not truly, but he had saved her life, and perhaps in some strange way she had saved his, though not in the way he had intended. He drew in a slow breath, his soldier's resolve hardening again. Then I'll face it, he said simply. Whatever comes, I'll face it. Arinya glanced at him, her eyes narrowing slightly as though testing his words for cracks. But she saw none. Inside the enclave, whispers had already spread, and the clan awaited them. For Marcus, the path ahead would not be one of battles fought with weapons, but of struggles bound by ancient honor, unseen expectations, and the dangerous truth that his fate was now tied to the Kaliri noblewoman whose sword he had wielded. And as the great doors closed behind him, he felt the weight of that truth settle deep into his bones. The great gates of the Kaliri enclave closed with a deep, echoing sound that seemed to seal Marcus Hale's fate tighter than chains ever could. Inside, the world felt different from the sprawling markets and crowded human quarters he knew. The air carried the weight of age-old customs, the walls carved with symbols that spoke of battles, victories, and bloodlines far older than any human colony. Marcus followed Arinia in silence, his boots heavy against the smooth stone floor, every step echoing in the wide hall lined with tall Kaliri guards. Their piercing stares followed him, some with cold disdain, others with curiosity, but none with welcome. To them, he was the outsider who had dared to claim with his hands what no foreigner should ever touch, the sword of a noble bloodline. Arinia moved quickly, her robes brushing the ground, her shoulders squared as though she wanted to appear unshaken, though Marcus could sense the storm beneath her composure. She did not look back at him, not once, until they entered a chamber lit by the pale glow of suspended crystals. Inside, elders of her clan waited, seated in a semicircle. Their presence was heavy, their gazes sharp as blades. Marcus felt the weight of their silence before one of them finally spoke, his voice carrying the kind of authority that silenced rooms. "Human," the elder said, "you stand in this hall not as a guest nor as an intruder, but as one bound by act and oath. You wielded the blade of Arinia Kalir in open combat before witness and sky. Do you understand the depth of what you have done?" Marcus straightened, meeting the elder's gaze with the steady discipline of a soldier. "I understand that I saved her life. I understand that without action, she would have been killed. That is all I intended." His voice carried no fear, though he felt the enormity pressing against him. The elders murmured among themselves, some with skepticism, others with thoughtful pause. Arinia's eyes flicked to him briefly, then away again, as though torn between resentment and reluctant respect. Another elder leaned forward, his expression grave. "Your intent is irrelevant. Among the Kailiri, to wield a family sword is to take its blood into your hands. You have placed yourself upon a path that cannot be walked halfway. To turn aside is dishonor, and dishonor demands punishment. Do you accept this bond knowing it ties you to Arinia and her clan in ways your kind does not yet comprehend?" The silence that followed stretched long. Marcus weighed the words carefully, his mind flashing through possibilities. Refusal could mean exile or death. Acceptance meant stepping into a tradition he barely understood, but his instincts told him there was no other way. Finally, he gave a single nod. "I accept," he said. His words were plain, yet they filled the chamber like a stone dropped into still water. The elders leaned back, their faces unreadable, but something had shifted in the air. Arinia's voice broke the quiet, sharp and controlled. "Then he must be tested. It is law." She spoke without looking at him, her tone cold, as though putting distance between them was the only shield she had left. One of the elders inclined his head. "Yes. The trial of the blade. At dawn, he will face it. If he fails, the bond is broken through death. If he succeeds, the bond stands, and his fate is sealed beside yours, child of Kalir." Marcus felt the words settle in his chest like iron. A trial. Of course there would be a trial. Nothing about this was going to be simple. He glanced at Arinia, trying to read her expression, but her face was carved from stone. Perhaps she resented him for forcing this upon her life, or perhaps she feared for him but could not show it. Whatever she felt, she kept it buried deep. The elders dismissed them, and Arinia led Marcus out through narrow corridors, her silence as sharp as the edge of the sword he had once held. At last, when they reached a smaller chamber, she turned to him, her eyes dark with something between anger and warning. "You don't understand what you've accepted," she said. "The trial of the blade is no simple duel. It is meant to prove the worth of one bound to Kaliri steel. Even our own fail it." She stepped closer, her voice low, edged with frustration. "Why did you not refuse? Why did you not let them end this before it began?" Marcus met her gaze evenly, though he felt the storm in her words. "Because I don't run from what I've started, and because I won't let them see me, or you, shamed." His tone was calm, but there was steel in it. the kind of steel, forged in years of standing his ground when retreat might have been easier. For a moment, Arinya seemed ready to argue, but the words never left her lips. She only turned away, her shoulders tense, and whispered, "Then you had better be ready to face death." Night fell over the enclave like a shroud, the twin moons, rising high above the stone walls. Marcus found himself confined to a small chamber, guarded by silent warriors whose eyes never softened. He sat on the edge of a narrow cot, his mind replaying the day's events, each moment unraveling into questions he could not answer. What exactly would the trial demand of him? What strength could he muster against centuries of tradition? Yet beneath the uncertainty, a quiet resolve held steady. He had made his choice, and come dawn he would see it through. Meanwhile, in another chamber, Arinya knelt before the blade he had once held, her fingers tracing the etched runes on its steel. Her heart was torn. He had saved her, yes, but by doing so he had entwined their lives in ways neither of them could escape. The law was merciless, and if he failed, his blood would be on her hands as much as his own. She closed her eyes, whispering words only the walls could hear. May the ancestors judge him with fairness, and may his courage not betray him. As the moons cast their pale light over the enclave, whispers spread among the Kaleri. Some saw Marcus as a fool doomed to die at dawn. Others wondered if perhaps there was more to humanity than they had believed. And somewhere in the heart of the night, Marcus Hale prepared himself, not just for a trial of steel, but for the first steps into a fate that would bind him to Arinya Kalir forever. The dawn came slowly, spilling pale light over the jagged peaks that surrounded the Kaleri enclave. The air was sharp with cold, and every stone seemed to hum with anticipation. Marcus Hale stood at the threshold of the trial grounds, his breath steady but his thoughts coiled tight within him. Before him stretched a vast courtyard, its floor carved with runes that shimmered faintly as if alive. Arinya walked several paces ahead, her back rigid, her robes catching the morning wind. She did not glance at him, but Marcus felt her silence, more heavily than words. Around the courtyard, Kaleri citizens had gathered in silence, their eyes fixed on the human who dared step into a rite older than his people's presence among the stars. No voice rose in cheer, no hand offered welcome. To them, this was a spectacle, a moment to prove whether humanity's bravery was anything more than reckless arrogance. The elders stood at the far end, cloaked in deep crimson, their faces shadowed beneath the carved hoods of their station. One raised a hand, and the murmurs of the crowd ceased instantly. The elder's voice carried like thunder, filling every corner of the courtyard. Marcus Hale, you who wielded the blade of Kalir without right, you now stand at the trial of the blade. By your choice, you accept the test. If you prevail, your bond to the bloodline stands unbroken and you are claimed by the sword's oath. If you fail, your life is forfeit. The words settled like cold iron across Marcus's chest, but his face remained calm, his eyes fixed on the elder. A warrior approached, tall and imposing, clad in armor that shimmered like blackened steel. In his hands he carried the sword Marcus had once wielded, its runes glowing faintly, alive with an energy Marcus could feel from where he stood. The warrior extended the blade, but not to Marcus. He placed it before Arinya. She hesitated only a moment before stepping forward, her fingers brushing against the weapon as though weighing the cost of passing it on. Then she turned, holding it out to Marcus. Their eyes met for the first time since the night before, and in her gaze he read conflict, fear, and a reluctant spark of respect. "Take it," she said softly, her voice steady enough for the crowd to hear. "What you began, you must finish." Marcus accepted the weapon, its weight heavier than he remembered, though not only from its steel. As his fingers wrapped around the hilt, the runes pulsed, faint light crawling across the blade as though acknowledging him. The crowd shifted uneasily at the sight. The elder spoke again. "The trial has 3 paths. To endure them is to prove yourself. To falter is to fall. Begin." At once the courtyard floor shifted. The carved runes glowed brightly, lines of light spreading outward until the ground itself transformed into a vast, shifting maze. Walls of energy rose around Marcus, cutting him off from the crowd and Arinya. He was alone, the sword in his hand, and nothing else. The first trial had begun. The maze twisted and shifted as he walked, every turn different, the air humming with unseen power. Shadows moved along the walls, whispering voices that were not his own. They spoke in Kaleri tongue, words he could not understand but felt pressing against his mind like cold fingers. His training as a soldier told him to stay calm, to focus on the path ahead. Yet the whispers grew louder, turning into echoes of doubt. Images flickered at the edges of his vision. His failures, the faces of comrades lost in battles past, the weight of mistakes that had haunted him. The maze was testing his will, trying to break his focus. Marcus tightened his grip on the sword, grounding himself in its solid weight. "Not this time," he muttered, pressing forward. He ignored the illusions, forcing each step to carry him closer to the center. The whispers swelled, but with every stride his resolve grew stronger. Finally, the maze opened into a wide chamber. The runes flared, and the illusions vanished. He had passed the first trial, the trial of spirit. The floor shifted again, pulling him into the second challenge. This time he stood on a platform suspended over a void, bridges of light stretching out before him. Across the expanse a figure formed, an armored Kaleri warrior, faceless and towering, wielding a blade twice the size of Marcus's. Without a word it advanced, its strikes powerful enough to shake the platform beneath them. Marcus barely had time to react, raising his sword to block. The force sent him staggering, his muscles screaming from the impact. The duel was unlike any fight he had known. The warrior's strength was inhuman, each swing a storm meant to crush him. Marcus knew he could not win by brute force. He steadied his breathing, drawing on his years of training, remembering every drill that had drilled into him: patience, timing, precision. He shifted, letting the giant's swings pass just close enough to graze the air, conserving his strength, waiting for an opening. The chance came when the warrior raised its blade high for a crushing blow. Marcus darted forward, driving his sword into the gap beneath the warrior's guard. The runes on his blade flared, cutting through the illusionary steel. The warrior staggered, then dissolved into light, leaving Marcus standing on the trembling platform. He had survived the trial of strength. The third trial came swiftly. The platform fell away and Marcus was pulled into darkness, weightless, his body suspended in a void where nothing existed. Then from the shadows, a voice spoke. Not in Kaleri, but in his own tongue. "Do you understand what it means to hold this blade? To bind yourself to another's fate? To carry not only your life but hers as well?" Before him, a vision formed. Arinya, standing bound in chains of light, her face pale with fear. A second figure appeared, himself, lying, broken on the ground. The voice pressed harder. "If you claim the blade, you claim her victories and her failures, her honor and her burden. Are you ready to surrender your life to something beyond yourself?" Marcus stared at the vision, his chest rising with steady breaths. His mind reached back to that moment in the market, when he had acted without thought, only instinct. He had not seized the blade for power nor for glory. He had done it to protect someone who had no one else in that instant. That truth had not changed. Slowly he raised his sword, its runes glowing brighter in the void. "I am ready," he said firmly. "Not because I seek it, but because I will not turn away." The darkness shattered like glass. Light surged around him, the runes on the ground blazed, and Marcus fell back onto the courtyard floor. The trials had ended. The crowd gasped as he emerged, his sword glowing in his hand, his body weary but unbroken. The elders exchanged long, unreadable glances. Finally, one stepped forward, his voice grave but tinged with respect. "The human has passed the trial of the blade. The bond is sealed. He stands now as one with the blood of Kalir." Arinya's expression flickered with shock, relief, and something she quickly masked. Marcus met her eyes, his breath heavy, but in that moment he understood. Their fates were now tied, whether either of them had chosen it or not. And among the Kaleri, whispers began, not of his failure, but of what it meant that a human had endured trials no outsider was meant to survive. The trial had ended, but silence still clung to the courtyard like mist, refusing to lift. Marcus stood at the center, the Kaleri blade, in his hand glowing faintly, as if the weapon itself acknowledged him now as its bearer. Around him, the crowd of nobles and common folk alike stared with a mix of unease and fascination. No outsider had ever endured the trial of the blade, let alone triumphed. To the Kaleri, this was not a small breach of custom. It was a rewriting of tradition that had stood for centuries. Arinya remained motionless a few steps behind him. Her face betrayed little, but Marcus could feel the weight of her silence. To her people, what had just occurred was binding. The sword was not simply a weapon. It was a symbol of bloodline and bond. By wielding it and surviving the trial, Marcus had claimed more than honor. He had tied himself irrevocably to her clan and to her. The elders approached slowly, their crimson cloaks sweeping across the carved stone. The eldest among them stopped before Marcus, his eyes sharp beneath the shadow of his hood. "The bond is sealed," he declared for all to hear. "The blade does not lie. From this day, Marcus Hale of Earth is bound to the blood of Arinya. Kalir, her oath is his oath, her fate is his fate." His words echoed through the courtyard, leaving no room for dispute. Marcus said nothing. He tightened his grip on the blade, then released it, letting its weight rest across his arm as he bowed his head slightly in acknowledgement. Inside, however, his thoughts churned. He had stepped in to stop bloodshed, and now he found himself at the center of a union neither he nor Arinya had chosen. Arinya finally spoke, her voice calm but edged with steel. "So it is decided," she said, though her eyes never left Marcus. "The human has tied himself to my clan. But know this, bond or no bond, I will not accept weakness." She turned sharply, her robe swirling as she walked away, leaving Marcus alone in the center of the courtyard. The crowd parted in silence as she left. Murmurs rose only after she was gone, whispers about the dishonor of her being bound to an off-worlder, about the insult and the danger it might bring. Some voices spoke of curiosity, wondering what it might mean that a human had accomplished what few Kaleri warriors had ever managed. Marcus caught fragments of their words, but he forced himself to focus instead on steady breathing. He had walked into a storm, and there would be no walking out untouched. That evening, Marcus was summoned to the Kaleri stronghold where Arinya's clan resided. The structure rose like carved obsidian against the pale sky, its towers sharp and cold, its halls echoing with restrained grandeur. He was led to a chamber lit by dim firelight, the walls lined with tapestries depicting ancient battles. Arinya stood at the far end waiting. She wore no ceremonial robe now, only a warrior's attire, though her posture was no less regal. "You should not have taken the blade," she said as he entered, her voice even. "Do you understand what you've done?" Marcus stopped a few paces from her, meeting her gaze without flinching. "I know what I did in the courtyard," he said quietly. "I protected you. The rest—" He let the words trail off, searching for a balance between honesty and respect. "The rest I didn't plan for." Her eyes narrowed, sharp as the blade he had carried. "Among my people, bonds are not mistakes. They are not things stumbled into without thought. The sword does not choose lightly. Whether you intended it or not, it has tied us together. That bond will be tested again and again, and if you falter, you will bring dishonor not only upon yourself but upon me and my clan." Marcus let her words sink in. He could feel the weight of what she was saying, but he also recognized the fear beneath it. She had not wanted this any more than he had. Yet unlike him, she bore the crushing gaze of her entire people. A noble woman bound to a human who was little more than an outsider in their eyes. "Then we face it together," he said simply. For the first time, her composure cracked, just slightly. Surprise flickered across her face before she smoothed it away. "You speak as if you understand what it means. You don't, but perhaps you will." Before more could be said, A low chime echoed through the chamber. A servant entered swiftly, bowing deeply before Arinya. "My lady, the rivals of House Sarek demand audience. They call the bond a fraud, and they summon you to answer their challenge." Arinya's jaw tightened. House Sarek, the very rivals who had cornered her in the marketplace before Marcus intervened. Of course they would seize this moment. To them this was an opportunity not only to challenge her, but to humiliate her clan by undermining the legitimacy of the bond. If they succeeded, she would lose face, and Marcus would be branded nothing more than an intruder who had trespassed against sacred law. She glanced at Marcus, her expression unreadable. "You wish to stand at my side? Then stand with me now." The summons brought them to another hall, one lined with tall stone pillars, where the rivals of House Sarek waited. Their leader, a tall Kaliri with sharp features and eyes that burned with disdain, stepped forward. "So this is the human," he said, his voice dripping with scorn. "The outsider who dares claim a place in our traditions. You hold a bond not meant for you. It is a mockery." Marcus did not rise to the bait. He simply stood beside Arinya, silent but steady, letting her speak. "The bond was sealed by trial," she answered coldly. "It is no mockery. It is law," the rival sneered. "Then prove it. Let the human stand where Kaliri blood would stand. Let him fight in your name. If he falters, then your bond shatters, and your claim with it." The chamber filled with murmurs. It was a challenge no outsider could be expected to win, and yet refusal would mean dishonor worse than defeat. Arinya's hands clenched at her sides, but she did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked at Marcus as if testing whether he would shrink under the weight of the challenge. Marcus met her gaze and nodded once. "Then I'll fight." The rival laughed, a cruel sound that echoed against the stone. "So be it. Let us see if your bond is strength, or a weakness waiting to be broken." And with that, the stage was set for a confrontation that would determine whether Marcus's unexpected bond would survive its first true test, or collapse before it could even begin. The challenge was set, and word spread through the Kaliri, stronghold like wildfire. By dawn, the great arena carved into the cliffs was already filling with onlookers, their voices blending into a restless hum. To the Kaliri, duels were more than contests of strength. They were living judgments, a spectacle where honor was measured before the eyes of all. Today, they would witness whether Marcus Hale, the human who had unwittingly tied himself to Arinya's clan, could withstand the test that even seasoned Kaliri warriors often dreaded. Marcus stood at the edge of the arena, the Kaliri sword in his hand once more. The weapon still felt foreign, its balance different from the blades he had trained with as a soldier, yet there was a strange weight to it now that went beyond steel. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a symbol of his bond, the very reason he was standing here. He flexed his grip, breathing slowly, trying to steady his nerves. Across the arena, his opponent entered with deliberate steps. The champion of House Sarek was no ordinary fighter. The tall warrior wore gleaming armor marked with his clan's sigil, and in his hands rested a curved halberd that shimmered with energy along its edge. The crowd fell into silence as the elders took their seats at the high dais, their presence giving weight to what was about to unfold. Among them, Arinya sat in reserved stillness, her eyes fixed on Marcus. She did not speak, but he could feel the intensity of her gaze. She had more to lose than he did. If he fell, it was not only his honor at stake, but hers and her clan's. The elder overseeing the challenge raised his staff, his voice carrying across the arena. "The bond has been called into question. By blade and by will, truth shall be decided. Let combat begin." The staff struck the ground, and in an instant, the Kaliri champion lunged. His movements were swift, practiced, each strike of the halberd designed not only to kill but to overwhelm. Marcus raised the sword to block the impact, sending a jolt down his arm. He shifted quickly, recalling his training back on Earth. Footwork, angles, the importance of not meeting force head-on when outmatched. The Kaliri's strength was undeniable, but Marcus's experience lay in adaptability. The duel pressed on, each clash ringing through the arena. Marcus dodged a sweeping arc, rolling to the side and forcing himself back to his feet before the halberd's blade carved into the stone where he had just stood. He countered with a strike, aiming not for a killing blow, but to test his opponent's guard. Sparks flew as steel met steel, and the crowd gasped at the sight of the human refusing to yield ground. But the Kaleri champion was relentless. He drove Marcus back strike after strike, his expression filled with disdain. "You are nothing but an interloper," he spat between attacks. "This bond is a stain on our bloodline. I will break it with your defeat." Marcus said nothing, focusing only on surviving each moment. His body ached with the strain, but he refused to give the champion the satisfaction of seeing weakness. Somewhere in the stands, he could sense Arinya's tension, though her face remained unreadable. He told himself that if he could endure just long enough, he might find a way to turn the tide. Minutes stretched like hours. Dust rose around them, and every clang of weapons echoed like thunder. Marcus began to notice patterns in his opponents. Attacks, small openings in the rhythm, moments where speed turned into predictability. On instinct, he shifted tactics. Instead of purely defending, he let the champion press forward, then redirected his strikes, conserving energy while letting the Kaleri's aggression work against him. At last, the opportunity came. The champion lunged in with a wide strike, committing fully to the blow. Marcus twisted, letting the halberd scrape past his side, close enough to tear the fabric of his uniform, but not his flesh. In that same instant, Marcus swung the Kaleri sword upward, catching his opponent off balance and sending him stumbling. Gasps rippled through the crowd. For the first time, the human had gained ground. The champion roared, enraged, and charged again with renewed fury. But Marcus's resolve only hardened. He deflected, sidestepped, endured until another misstep opened the way. This time he struck with precision, driving the flat of the blade against the champion's chest and knocking him hard to the ground. The arena fell utterly silent. The Kaleri warrior struggled to rise, his weapon slipping from his grasp. Marcus stood over him, the tip of the sword lowered but not thrust forward. He could end it. Tradition would allow it. But instead he pulled the blade back and let his opponent collapse without further harm. The silence broke into an uproar, some voices shouting in outrage, others in awe. Mercy was not weakness among the Kaleri, but it was rare and coming. From an outsider, it carried unexpected weight. The elder rose once more, his voice cutting through the chaos. "The challenge has been met. The bond holds. The human stands, and by standing, proves his claim." The champion of House Sarek was carried away, defeated, but alive. Marcus lowered the sword, his chest heaving as the weight of exhaustion finally caught up with him. Across the arena, Arinya rose slowly to her feet. Her expression remained calm, but for a moment, just a flicker, Marcus thought he saw relief in her eyes. As he left the arena, escorted back toward the stronghold, Marcus could not ignore the whispers that followed him. To some, he had become a curiosity, a human who had fought like one of their own and won. To others, he was a threat, a foreigner now cemented into their traditions. Either way, he had changed something that could not be undone. That night, in the quiet halls of the Kaleri stronghold, Arinya came to him. She did not speak immediately, only studied him as if trying to measure the man who had just risked everything on her behalf. At last, she said softly, "You are not like them." Marcus met her gaze, too weary for formality. "I'm not trying to be," he answered. "I just did what I had to do." For the first time since they had met, Arinya's lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile. "Then perhaps," she murmured, "this bond may yet mean more than either of us expected." And though neither of them fully understood what lay ahead, the weight of that bond pressed heavier than ever, binding them not only by law and tradition, but by the beginning of something far more uncertain. The Kaleri stronghold seemed calmer in the days after the duel, but Marcus soon learned that quiet did not mean peace. Whispers traveled faster than wind through the stone corridors, carrying rumors of resentment and doubt. Some admired the human who had stood his ground and spared a Kaleri warrior when he had every right to strike him down. Others, however, saw only humiliation, believing Marcus's survival had made their traditions vulnerable to mockery. It was not the clash of swords that worried Marcus now, but the clash of unseen forces weaving themselves around him. He spent his days training in the courtyards, the Kaleri sword always within reach, though no duel was called. His nights were restless. He often woke to the faint echo of footsteps outside his chamber, vanishing too quickly to catch. It left him uneasy, and though Orinya rarely showed fear, Marcus began to notice the subtle way her hand lingered near the hilt of her own blade whenever they walked together. She too sensed the tension, though she did not yet speak of it. One evening, as the twin moons cast silver light across the stronghold, Orinya finally broke her silence. They were walking along a balcony overlooking the city below, its lights scattered like jewels across the dark. "The duel settled one matter," she said quietly, her eyes fixed on the horizon, "but it stirred another. House Sarek will not forgive this humiliation. They may have lost in the arena, but their influence runs deep in the council. They will not strike openly again. They will turn to shadows." Marcus frowned. "Assassins?" "Not so crude," Orinya replied. "They prefer subtler blades. Lies. Alliances. Deals struck in silence. They will make it so the council questions the bond, questions you, until we are cornered." Marcus gripped the balcony's stone edge. His instincts as a soldier told him the threat was real. He had fought enemies with weapons of metal and fire, but politics had always been a battlefield of its own, one far trickier to navigate. "So what do we do?" he asked. Orinya turned her gaze toward him. "We endure, but we also watch. The council will meet again in 3 nights. Until then, we must find who Sarek has already ensnared. If they speak against you before the elders, your victory in the arena will mean nothing." From that moment, the air seemed to thicken with unease. Marcus began to notice fragments of strange behavior: a servant who avoided his eyes when offering food, a guard who lingered too long outside, his chambers hushed voices that ceased abruptly whenever he entered a hall. The Kaleri were proud, disciplined, but not immune to fear or ambition. Sarek's influence was creeping like roots beneath stone. On the second night, Marcus followed one of those lingering guards into the lower corridors. The stronghold's underpassages twisted like veins beneath the cliffside, dimly lit by flickering torches. He moved quietly, years of training guiding his steps until he caught the murmur of voices. Pressing himself against the wall, he listened. "The council will hear the claim," one voice whispered, low and urgent. "The bond is invalid." He touched the sword in error. "It cannot bind across species. The elders will see reason if enough of us demand it." Another voice, harsher, replied, "And if they do not? What then?" There was a pause. Then came the answer, chilling in its certainty. "Then we ensure the human does not live to see the council at all." Marcus's grip tightened on the sword at his side. He forced himself to remain silent, retreating into the shadows before the conspirators could discover him. His heart hammered as he made his way back to the upper halls. They were not merely planning to undermine him, they were preparing to erase him. When he told Orinya what he had overheard, her eyes darkened with fury. "I warned you," she said, though her voice carried no reproach. "This is how they work. If they cannot break you in the open, they will break you in secret." "And if they succeed?" Marcus asked. "Then our clans descend into chaos," she answered. "Every bond, every tradition will be questioned. Sarek knows this. They are willing to risk it." The night before the council met, Marcus could not sleep. He paced the chamber, the weight of what was coming pressing heavily on his shoulders. He had faced soldiers, alien raiders, and death itself before. But this was different. Here victory was not about strength alone, but about survival against unseen enemies who moved with words and whispers. At dawn, the council gathered in the grand hall. The chamber was vast, its walls carved with centuries of history, and the air heavy with incense. Marcus stood beside Orinya, the sword resting across his palms as a symbol of the bond. The elders sat in a great circle, their expressions unreadable as the clans presented their voices. One by one, speakers rose. Some spoke of Marcus's courage in the arena, honoring the choice he had made to spare a rival's life. Others, clearly, under Sarek's sway, spoke of tradition, insisting the bond was a mistake that risked shattering the balance between clans. The words grew sharper, the tension thicker, until the air itself seemed ready to ignite. Marcus remained silent through it all, letting Arinya stand as his voice. Her arguments were calm, firm, and unyielding. He acted not as an intruder, but as one who understood our ways. He stood before the crowd and accepted our judgment. If this bond is denied, then what meaning do our laws hold? Shall we discard them simply because their outcome displeases us? The council chamber erupted in debate. Some nodded in agreement. Others scowled. It was then that a figure from House Sarek rose. His words carried venom. This human defiles our traditions. Mercy in the arena was weakness, not honor. Bonds cannot cross our kind. To allow this is to open the door to chaos. Murmurs rippled through the hall. For a moment, Marcus felt the tide shifting against him. But before Sarek could finish, another elder stood. One Marcus had not expected. She was old, her hair silver, her voice steady. "You speak of chaos," she said, her gaze sharp. "Yet it is Sarek who sows it. The bond was formed under the eyes of our people. To deny it is to deny what we all saw. The question is not whether it is valid. The question is whether we honor the truth we witnessed or bend to fear." The hall fell into silence. The words struck deeper than any blade, leaving Sarek's representative speechless. Marcus exhaled slowly, realizing then that the true battle had never been in the arena. It had always been here, in the shifting currents of loyalty and honor. And though the day was not yet won, he could feel the weight of allies beginning to gather behind him. The shadows of conspiracy had not vanished, but in that moment, Marcus knew he had survived their first strike. The storm had only begun. When the council session ended, the chamber emptied slowly, but the silence it left behind weighed heavily on Marcus. He had stood in battles before, where the enemy was clear and the objective simple: survive, protect, win. Here, though, victory did not carry the rush of triumph. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, aware that one wrong step could send everything crashing down. He glanced at Arinya as they left the hall together, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. She carried herself as if she were carved from steel, but Marcus knew she felt the same tremor beneath her calm. The storm was not over. The corridors of the stronghold were hushed that evening, as though even the walls waited to hear what fate had been decided. Servants avoided their eyes. Guards shifted uneasily as they passed. The news of the council's division was already spreading, and with it, doubt. Marcus could see it in the way Kaleri warriors whispered among themselves, in the way their gazes lingered just a little too long on the sword he carried. For them, the blade was more than metal. It was a symbol, one that now bound a human to their most sacred traditions. And symbols had power, sometimes more dangerous than weapons. Later that night, Arinya led Marcus to the temple carved deep into the cliff. It was a place reserved for rituals of transition, births, bonds, farewells to the dead. The chamber was lit by pools of soft blue flame, the air heavy with the scent of herbs burned in silence. "This is where the elders expect us to appear tomorrow," she said. "If the bond is to be affirmed, it must be here, before witnesses and the flame. Only then will it be sealed beyond dispute." Marcus studied her face. "And if the council refuses to recognize it?" "Then the bond collapses, and everything we've endured falls with it." Arinya replied quietly. "Our enemies would claim proof that you never belonged. And worse, it would prove that Sarek can twist even the laws we swore were unshakable. That kind of victory would not end with us. It would spread." Marcus let out a long breath. He had not asked for this role, had not sought the sword or the bond, yet now it felt less like a chain and more like a responsibility that had chosen him. He thought of the Kaleri crowd that had watched him in the arena, their stunned silence when he spared a rival's life. Some had called it weakness, But others, he saw it in their eyes, had seen something else. A possibility. A different kind of strength. Perhaps that was the reason Sarek fought so fiercely to undo him. The next day dawned gray, with mist curling through the stronghold like ghostly threads. Marcus felt it was an omen of the uncertainty ahead. The temple filled with elders, nobles, and warriors from every clan. The air was tight with expectation, every gaze sharp, every whisper sharp enough to cut. In the center of the chamber burned the ceremonial flame, its glow reflected in the polished stone floor. Marcus and Arinya stepped forward together. She moved with calm dignity, while his soldier's instincts reminded him to stay alert, to watch the faces in the crowd for any flicker of treachery. At the edge of the gathering stood figures from House Sarek, their expressions cold, calculating. He could feel their hatred pressing against him like a physical weight. An elder raised his voice, his tone solemn. The bond has been contested. The question stands. Is it truth, or is it void? One by one, the voices of the council were heard again. Some argued tradition, others argued honor. But when the time came for Marcus to speak, he did not hesitate. He stepped forward, holding the sword across his palms, and let his voice carry through the chamber. I am not Kaleri. I was not raised in your ways, nor did I seek to take part in them. But when danger came, I acted not as a stranger, but as one who believed life, any life, was worth defending. The sword was not mine, yet I carried it, and I carry it still. If this bond is to be denied, then say so openly. But understand this, it is not just me you cast aside. You will tell your own people that the laws they witnessed mean nothing, that truth can be rewritten when it no longer serves those in power. If that is the future you choose, then Sarek has already won. The words echoed in the silence that followed. Even Arinya, who knew his fire well by now, looked at him with a flicker of surprise. The Kaleri were not a people who bent easily to outside voices, but Marcus had not spoken as an intruder. He had spoken as someone who believed their honor was worth defending, even if it was not his by birth. Finally, the silver-haired elder who had defended him before rose once more. The bond is truth, she declared. We cannot call it void without calling our own judgment a lie. To deny it is to unravel all that binds us as a people. The chamber stirred. Some protested, others cheered, but the decision was made. The flame burned higher, its light falling across Marcus and Arinya as the elder placed her hand upon the sword. The bond is sealed, she said. The weight of the moment settled on Marcus's shoulders. He felt it not as a chain, but as a mantle. For better or worse, his path was tied to Arinya's now. Not by accident, not by mockery, but by choice confirmed before all. But even as relief coursed through him, he saw the faces of Sarek's followers harden. They had lost this battle, but not the war. They would not forgive, nor would they forget. Marcus understood then that the bond was not an ending. It was the beginning of something far larger than himself, larger than Arinya, larger even than the quarrels of their clans. It was a step toward a future neither side had fully imagined yet. As they left the temple, Arinya walked at his side, her hand brushing lightly against his. She did not speak, but her silence carried meaning. They were bound now, not only by ritual but by everything they had endured together. Marcus looked out at the mist-shrouded city below and knew the challenges waiting would be greater than any duel. Sarek's shadows would not rest. Enemies would rise again. Yet for the first time since he had grasped the sword, he felt ready. The weight of the bond was heavy, yes, but it was a burden he was willing to carry.